I want you to close your eyes for just a moment. Take a deep breath and try to remember a very specific smell from your childhood. Perhaps it is the rich, dark aroma of Greek coffee slowly bubbling in hot sand, or the sweet, toasted scent of sesame seeds from the morning bread rings. Or maybe it is the sound of your mother calling your name from a balcony, echoing across a neighborhood street just as the sun began to set. Welcome back to a time that lives only in our memories. Today, we are going to take a long, unhurried walk through the Greece of the 1960s, 70s, and 80s. We will explore 30 forgotten details of everyday life that we have slowly, quietly lost forever. As we journey through these memories, you might find yourself smiling or perhaps wiping away a small tear. And I promise you, when we reach the very last memory on our journey today, you will remember the most beautiful, touching part of our shared past, something that truly defined who we were. Before we begin our walk down these old, familiar streets, let us remember how time used to feel. Back then, time flowed at a completely different pace. It was slower, more deliberate, and delightfully unhurried. There was a rhythm to our days that demanded patience. We had to wait for the postman to bring us news from afar. We had to wait for our favorite song to play on the radio. We had to wait all week for that special Sunday meal. Today, people might look back and think that without mobile phones, endless television channels, and instant deliveries, our lives must have been empty or poor. But you and I know the profound truth. We were infinitely richer. We were rich in genuine human connection, in the warmth of our communities, and in the quiet joy of simple things. The lack of modern technology meant that we had to look each other in the eyes. We had to talk, to argue, to laugh together on the sidewalks. Every little object, every daily task, was a ritual that brought us closer. Let us turn the clock back and remember exactly how magical that world really was. Let us begin our journey with a sound that made every child's heart skip a beat during those long, blazing summer days. I am talking about the magical, ringing bell of the neighborhood ice cream vendor. Before the era of massive supermarkets with endless freezer aisles, the ice cream came directly to you, pushed on a heavy three-wheeled cart, or sometimes carried on a specially modified bicycle. Do you remember the sheer excitement when you heard that distinctive bell ringing in the distance? You would run to beg your parents for a couple of drachmas and then sprint out into the dusty street, joining a swarm of other neighborhood children. The vendor, usually wearing a white cap, would open the heavy, insulated lid of his cart, and a cloud of cold, sweet mist would escape into the hot afternoon air. Inside that cart were absolute treasures. Perhaps you chose a classic vanilla and chocolate treat on a wooden stick, or a simple paper cup with a tiny wooden spoon. The flavors were simple, but nothing today could ever taste quite so rich, quite so perfect. We would eat it quickly before it melted under the fierce Greek sun, our fingers sticky, our faces glowing with smiles. It was a shared moment of pure joy that united the whole street. Moving on to a true cornerstone of the traditional kitchen, let us remember the ice cellar. Long before electric refrigerators hummed quietly in every single home, keeping food fresh was a daily physical challenge. The wooden icebox stood proudly in the kitchen, but it was useless without the daily delivery from the iceman. You could hear his heavy truck or horse-drawn cart coming down the road. He would carry massive, crystal-clear blocks of frozen water wrapped tightly in rough burlap sacks to keep them from melting in the heat. Using giant, intimidating iron tongs, he would haul the heavy block up the stairs and slide it into the top compartment of your wooden icebox. Throughout the day, the ice would slowly melt and the water would drip steadily into a pan at the bottom, which had to be emptied regularly so it would not flood the kitchen floor. Sometimes, on incredibly hot days, he would chip off a small, sharp shard of ice and hand it to you to suck on. It was the purest, coldest water you had ever tasted, a tiny miracle of winter delivered right into the heart of a sweltering Mediterranean summer. Now close your eyes again and listen to the melancholy melody echoing between the apartment buildings. It is the sound of the barrel piano, the beloved Laterna. This was not just an instrument, it was a traveling piece of art. The large wooden box was always beautifully decorated with painted flowers, intricate patterns, and sometimes framed pictures of beautiful women or landscapes. The man operating it would turn the heavy iron crank with a steady, rhythmic motion, and out would pour the romantic, nostalgic songs of old Athens. The music was bright, yet it always carried a deep undertone of beautiful sorrow. When the laterna passed below your balcony, it was a neighborhood event. Women would step out of their kitchens, lean over the iron railings, and listen. Then they would wrap a few drachmas tightly in a small piece of newspaper and toss it gently down to the street below for the musician to catch. The sound of that music fading slowly into the distance as the man moved to the next street is a profound auditory memory of a disappearing world, a time when music came to your window instead of through a screen. Think back to the small corner grocery store, the beloved neighborhood Bakaliko. The moment you pushed the wooden door open, you were hit by an incredible, unforgettable wall of scents. It was a dense mixture of sharp olive oil soap, salted cod, oregano, and the rich, briny smell of feta cheese sitting in large wooden barrels. Things were not wrapped in plastic back then. Legumes like lentils and beans were kept in huge burlap sacks, and the grocer would scoop them out and weigh them for you on a heavy brass scale. But the most important item in the entire store was not for sale. It was the grocer's little notebook, the legendary ledger. In an era before credit cards, this worn-out notebook was the ultimate symbol of human trust. The grocer knew your family, he knew your father's payday, and he would write down what you bought, knowing the bill would be settled at the end of the month. You were not just a customer, you were a neighbor. The grocer knew your name, asked about your health, and often slipped a small piece of candy into your hand before you walked back home with your heavy paper bags. What about those warm, velvet summer evenings? Let us turn our minds to the open-air cinema, a true sanctuary of Greek summer nights. Stepping into the outdoor theatre felt like entering a secret garden. The air was thick with the intoxicating scent of blooming jasmine, honeysuckle, and the faint, smoky trail of mosquito coils burning in the corners. Under your shoes, the white gravel crunched loudly as you looked for the perfect canvas director's chair. We would sit under the open, starry sky, armed with a cold, sticky bottle of orangeade and a paper cone filled with roasted pumpkin seeds. The sharp sound of teeth cracking the seeds open provided a constant background noise to the film. Then, the projector would click and whir, casting a magical beam of light through the dark air. We watched classic comedies, weeping and laughing alongside famous actors on the silver screen. When the intermission came, everyone would rush to the small canteen. It was not just about watching a movie, it was a communal gathering, a place where the whole neighborhood came together to dream under the summer stars. Let us wander back to the sacred rituals of Sunday mornings. Before the luxury of large, modern electric stoves, preparing the Sunday roast was a neighborhood affair. Early in the morning, mothers would carefully prepare the large, round aluminium baking pan. They would fill it with generous pieces of lamb, quartered potatoes, crushed garlic, and a heavy pour of olive oil, lemon juice, and fragrant mountain oregano. But they did not bake it at home. Instead, it was the children's job to carefully carry this heavy, sloshing pan down the street to the local bakery. The baker had a massive, wood-fired oven that was perfect for slow roasting the family meal. At noon, the streets would fill with the most heavenly, mouth-watering aroma imaginable. People would walk back home, carrying their hot, bubbling pans with thick kitchen towels, while neighborhood dogs followed eagerly, hoping for a dropped morsel. This shared oven meant that every Sunday, the entire street smelled of lemon and roasted meat. It was a beautiful, practical tradition that turned a simple family meal into a shared neighborhood rhythm. And then came the absolute, sacred stillness of the afternoon siesta. When the heavy, suffocating heat of July and August descended upon the city, the world simply stopped turning. Shutters were drawn tight to keep the fierce sun out, plunging the living rooms into a cool, pleasant darkness. From 2 until 5 in the afternoon, Absolute silence was strictly enforced. You had to whisper, walking on tiptoes, so you would not wake your hard-working father who was resting on the couch. The streets outside were entirely deserted, baking in the heat, the asphalt shimmering. The only sound permitted in the universe was the deafening, rhythmic chirping of the cicadas in the nearby pine trees. For a child, being forced to lie quietly on cool cotton sheets when you desperately wanted to play was sheer torture. But looking back, that forced pause was a beautiful thing. It was a collective sigh of relief, a daily reset button for the mind and body. The afternoon siesta taught us the value of rest, of silence, and of respecting the peace of our neighbours. When the first bitter chill of winter finally arrived in the city, the streets transformed. Let us remember the comforting presence of the chestnut vendor. You would spot him on a busy street corner, wrapped in a heavy coat, standing behind his glowing charcoal brazier. The fragrant, sweet smoke would rise into the crisp evening sky, calling out to everyone passing by. For just a few coins, he would scoop a handful of hot, freshly roasted chestnuts into a makeshift cone fashioned from old newspaper pages. You would plunge your hands deep into your coat pockets, clutching that warm paper cone like a precious treasure to thaw your freezing fingers. Peeling the blackened, cracked shells was a delicate art that left your fingertips dark with soot. But the reward was incredible. The chestnut inside was soft, earthy, and perfectly sweet, carrying the smoky flavour of the burning charcoal. Eating those chestnuts while walking under the city lights, blowing warm breath into your hands, is a quintessential memory of winter, a simple pleasure that brought profound comfort on a cold evening. Let us step inside the traditional coffee house, the beating heart of men's social life. The air inside was thick and heavy, a hazy blend of cigarette smoke and the rich scent of roasted coffee. The acoustic landscape was unforgettable. There was the constant, rhythmic clicking of worry beads slipping smoothly through rough fingers. Then, the sharp, aggressive slam of wooden backgammon checkers hitting the board, accompanied by triumphant shouts or frustrated groans. The coffee itself was an art form. Tiny white cups filled with strong, dark liquid, boiled slowly in a brass pot nestled deep in hot sand. The men would sit at small, round marble tables for hours. They argued passionately about politics, football, and the news of the day, gesturing wildly with their hands. Yet, despite the heated arguments, there was a deep sense of brotherhood. This place was their sanctuary, their daily parliament, and their escape. It was a vibrant, noisy theatre of everyday life where community bonds were forged over a single, slowly sipped cup of coffee. Do you remember waking up in the pale morning light to the sound of hooves or the metallic rattle of a small truck? It was the milkman delivering fresh life to the doorstep. Before pasteurized cartons lined supermarket shelves, milk arrived raw, fresh, and strictly local. We would leave empty glass bottles or small aluminium cans outside the door the night before. By dawn, they were filled with rich, frothy white milk. Taking that milk into the kitchen was just the first step of the ritual. Mothers had to boil it immediately on the stove to make it safe to drink. Watching the milk boil was a task that required absolute focus. If you looked away for just 1 second, the white foam would suddenly rise and spill over the sides, creating a terrible mess and a burning smell. Once it cooled, a thick, luxurious layer of heavy cream formed on top. We fought over who got to eat that sweet cream on a slice of fresh bread, sprinkled with a little sugar. That morning glass of warm milk, sometimes mixed with a spoonful of cocoa, was the fuel of our childhood. What about our little yellow kiosks that anchored every single street corner? The kiosk was not just a tiny shop, it was the nervous system of the entire neighborhood. It was heavily draped with colorful magazines, newspapers hanging on wooden pegs, and exciting comic books. But its most important feature was the bright red rotary telephone sitting on the narrow counter. In an era when very few homes had a private phone line, the kiosk was our connection to the outside world. You would stand on the sidewalk, holding the heavy receiver, shouting over the noise of passing traffic to speak to a relative in a different city. Sometimes there would be a small line of people waiting patiently, pretending not to listen to your personal conversation. You bought single cigarettes if you were short on cash, or a small square of milk chocolate as a rare treat. The man or woman sitting inside that cramped wooden box knew everything about everyone. They were the guardians of neighborhood secrets, handing out change, newspapers, and friendly advice with equal measure. Let us remember the true freedom of childhood by stepping into the empty dirt lots. This was our kingdom, our endless playground. There were no structured playdates, no expensive toys, and certainly no glowing screens. After school, you threw your heavy bag into the house and ran outside. We played football using 2 large stones to mark the goalposts, playing until our knees were deeply scraped and our shoes were covered in thick, pale dust. We played hide and seek in the fading twilight, finding brilliant hiding spots behind old cars or low walls. The games were organized by the older children, and disputes were settled right there in the dirt. We roamed free, but we were never truly alone, because dozens of pairs of eyes watched from the balconies above. As the sky turned purple and the yellow streetlights flickered on, the chorus would begin. Mothers stepping out onto their balconies, calling our names, signaling that the day's adventures were over and dinner was ready. We walked home, exhausted, filthy, and entirely happy. Now, think of the immense joy that came with the arrival of a thin, bright blue envelope. Let us honor the ritual of handwritten letters. The neighborhood postman was a highly respected figure, carrying a heavy leather bag filled with news. When a letter arrived bearing exotic stamps from Germany, America, or Australia, it was cause for family celebration. The paper was incredibly thin, designed to keep postage costs down, and it crackled beautifully when you unfolded it. Inside, the distinctive, sloping handwriting of a distant uncle or a migrated sibling carried stories of their struggles and successes in foreign lands. The entire family would gather in the small living room, and the letter would be read aloud, slowly and dramatically, by the father. There were often tears of longing, followed by smiles at the enclosed photographs. Writing the reply was an equally serious task, choosing the right words to send across oceans. It was a tangible, physical connection to the people we loved, something you could hold against your chest, vastly more meaningful than a fleeting digital message. Let us walk back into the noisy, crowded schoolyard of our youth. We cannot forget the iconic blue school uniform. The sight of thousands of children dressed exactly the same is deeply etched in our collective memory. The uniform was a simple, sturdy blue tunic, always worn with a crisp, brilliant white collar that mothers would carefully wash and iron every single Sunday evening. Yes, it was strict, and yes, it suppressed individuality, but it also did something remarkably beautiful. It erased the painful social differences between us. In the classroom, looking at a sea of blue and white, you could not tell whose father was a wealthy doctor and whose father was a struggling labourer. We were all equal under the strict gaze of the teacher. The pockets of those uniforms held our treasures: erasers, small pencils, and perhaps a piece of chalk stolen from the blackboard. Wearing that uniform instilled a sense of duty and belonging, a shared identity that bonded an entire generation of students navigating the trials of youth together. And how can we possibly forget our profound, dedicated relationship with music? Before music was something you could stream instantly, it required intense effort and patience. The ultimate tool was the cassette recorder. We would sit for hours next to the radio, a blank tape loaded in the deck, with one finger hovering nervously over the record button. We waited through endless talking and terrible songs just to catch our absolute favourite track. The overwhelming frustration when the radio host decided to speak over the final guitar solo of the song is a pain every teenager of that era remembers vividly. We created meticulously curated mixtapes for our friends, or to secretly express our feelings to a school crush. And when the delicate magnetic tape inevitably got tangled inside the machine, we did not panic. We carefully pulled it out and used a yellow hexagonal pencil to slowly, manually rewind the tape back into place. Music was not just consumed, it was actively captured, cherished, and preserved on those small plastic rectangles. Do you recall the patient man standing behind a wooden tripod in the center of the public square? The street photographer was a master of preserving time. Getting a photograph taken was not a daily casual occurrence. It was a highly significant event. On a Sunday, families would dress in their absolute best clothes, hair perfectly combed, shoes shining, and take a walk to the main square or the large park. The photographer would be waiting, sometimes with a beautifully painted canvas backdrop, or perhaps a small wooden horse for the children to sit on. He would adjust his bulky camera, hide beneath a dark cloth, and tell you to hold perfectly still. The sudden, bright flash of the bulb would make you blink. Days later, you would receive the small, black and white printed photograph with its characteristic jagged white borders. That single piece of paper would be placed gently into a heavy family album, protected by tissue paper, a frozen fragment of time that proved we were young, we were well dressed, and we were together. Let us reflect on a philosophy of life that has almost entirely vanished today. The deep, ingrained belief in fixing things instead of throwing them away. When a leather shoe developed a hole in the sole, it was not tossed into the garbage. It was taken to the neighborhood shoemaker. His small shop smelled powerfully of rich leather, dark shoe polish, and strong chemical glue. He sat hunched over his anvil, his hands stained dark, meticulously stitching and hammering new life into old boots. Similarly, clothes were never discarded because of a tear. The local seamstress, working tirelessly on her humming cast-iron sewing machine, would alter, patch, and breathe new elegance into faded dresses. Trousers were passed down from older brothers to younger ones, hems let out as children grew. We valued the materials we had. There was a profound respect for the labor that went into making a garment or a pair of shoes. It was a culture of repair, a culture of profound care that extended beyond objects and into how we treated our relationships. What about the simplest, most deeply comforting morning snack? As the city slowly woke up and the early morning mist cleared, the kaluri seller would take his spot. This was a man of incredible balance and stamina. He carried a massive, flat wooden tray, perfectly balanced on the top of his head, stacked high with fresh, circular bread rings, covered entirely in toasted sesame seeds. The smell of that toasted sesame hitting the cool morning air was utterly intoxicating. People rushing to work, students running late for school. Everyone would pause for just a second to hand over a couple of small coins. The vendor would slip the bread ring into a tiny piece of thin paper. The crust was crunchy and golden, the inside soft and slightly sweet. Eating that simple bread on the run, feeling the warmth of the bakery still trapped inside it, brushing the stray sesame seeds from your sweater, is one of the most universally beloved memories of the morning rush. It was cheap, it was filling, and it tasted like home. Think too of the incredible back-breaking hard work of our mothers and grandmothers. Before the luxury of automatic washing machines, doing the laundry was a monumental physical task. The centerpiece of this ritual was the heavy corrugated metal or stone washboard. Women would stand over steaming tubs of boiling water, scrubbing shirts and trousers by hand, using large, rough blocks of pure green olive oil soap. The sheer physical strength required to scrub, wring out heavy wet cotton, and lift it into the basket was immense. For the white sheets, they would often boil them in large metal pots on the stove to ensure they remained perfectly pristine. And then came the hanging. Clotheslines were strung proudly across narrow alleys, connecting balconies. The sight of brilliant white sheets fluttering like flags in the breeze, filling the street with the fresh, clean scent of green soap and sunshine, was a testament to the quiet, relentless dedication of the women who kept our homes functioning against all odds. Finally, let us remember the greatest, most precious treasure of all, the one detail we have truly lost forever: the open doors. In those days, the front door of the house was rarely locked during the day. Sometimes, the key was simply left resting in the keyhole on the outside. Neighborhoods were not just collections of houses, they were living, breathing organisms. Neighbors were merely family members who happened to sleep under a different roof. If a mother ran out of sugar or onions while cooking, she would simply walk into the house next door, calling out a greeting, and borrow what she needed. In the warm summer evenings, women would pull their woven straw chairs out onto the sidewalk. They would sit in circles, peeling fresh green beans, shelling peas, and sharing the daily gossip as the stars came out. The concept of isolation did not exist. There was an unspoken net of absolute trust that caught you whenever you fell. We lived with our doors open, and because of that, our hearts were open to each other. As we reach the end of this nostalgic walk, we realize something important. We do not just miss the taste of that old ice cream or the sound of the barrel piano. What we truly miss is the version of ourselves that existed back then. We miss the feeling of youth, the slow passage of time, and the deep, unbreakable connection we shared with the people around us. The things may have vanished, but the warmth they brought to our lives remains etched in our souls forever. If this journey brought back beautiful memories for you, please subscribe to our channel and leave a like on this video, as it helps us keep these precious stories alive. Now, I turn to you. Which of these 30 forgotten details brought the biggest smile to your face, or perhaps a tear to your eye? Please, write your personal story down in the comments below. Let us read them, remember together, and keep the beautiful spirit of our past alive.